Africa is weak, so that even this magnificent edifice, I suspect, has not been erected by Ethiopian engineers. When I see the signage in Chinese, I suspect it is the Chinese. That is how weak we are. That is the reality of our mother continent. It is because we are politically weak, we are economically weak, socially we are disorganized, culturally and spiritually we are confused. That is the continent in which we are today. And the question, therefore, what would we do continentally in terms of trade? In 1980, under the Lagos Plan of Action, and some of you have been ambassadors, some of you are now serving cabinet ministers, you will grapple with this on a daily basis. Under the Lagos Plan of Action, Africa sat down in Lagos and said, we are going to improve trade amongst ourselves. 1980. Lagos Plan of Action. Did we do it? No, we did not do it. We did not do it because the European Union was instead engaging us under the African Caribbean, the Lomé Convention of 1975, or the Cotonou Convention of 2000. Africa remains the only continent which is described as Anglophone. So in Kenya or Uganda, where possibly only 20% speak the English language, we are Anglophone. In French, former French colonies, they are Francophone. In former Portuguese colonies, they are lusófona. In some Arab countries, they are Arabophone. That is who we are. So, when the OAU met in 2013, they asked the question, what happened to the Pan-African spirit? And when, therefore, they met in Sirte, in Libya, under the tutelage at that time of Muammar al-Gaddafi, it was resolved in 1999 that the OAU be renamed and be referred to as the African Union, and it was launched, as you know, in Durban, South Africa in the year 2000. But one of the most important things in the 2013 was the speech of the then chairman of the OAU Council, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, here in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. And I want you to read that letter, which I'll paraphrase, in which she writes an imaginary letter to Kwame Nkrumah. He tells and apologizes to Kwame, telling Kwame, we apologize to you because we did not listen to you. We are weak because we did not listen to you. We are divided into 54, 55, depending on whether the Moroccans agree that Sahrawi is a country. Nobody cares about us. And brothers and sisters, if you want to know how weak we are, and we are weak, look at how we are treated. Last month, the world met in New York. The General Assembly. When African heads of states and government are speaking, the hall is empty. Nobody bothers because they are saying nothing. And even if they are saying something, it is something that can be ignored. Compare when an African head of state and government is speaking and when the Prime Minister of Little Israel is speaking. They will listen because we are weak and disunited. So we have a weak continent because the spirit of Pan-Africanism disappeared. So the question that we can ask, what is the state of Pan-Africanism as we speak today? The African Union, which is weak, says the right things and does the wrong things 9 out of 10 times. And what are the critical areas in which we are weak? We are weak politically because nobody listens to us. On the 3rd day of March, 1900, on the 6th day of March, 1997, Mwalimu Julius Kambarage of Tanzania, speaking in Accra, Ghana, on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the independence of Ghana, said, the speech is entitled, "We Unite or We Perish." And Mwalimu says, I want to apologize to Kwame Nkrumah. Those of us who believed in gradualism were wrong. Nkrumah was right. But Nkrumah also did not appreciate the level of suspicion that existed amongst the leaders at that time. Our generation, he says, fought for the liberation of Africa. It is the duty of the new generation to carry the torch forward, he says in his plea. He says that I do not believe that the tribe can be the basis of mobilization in Africa. And he said that as I travel along across the world, people do not care about our Tanzanianness or our Ghanaianness or our Kenyanness or our Ethiopianness. In their eyes, we are all Africans. And perhaps that is what we should use as the building block in order to talk about African unity. But we are not being naive about that unity. Because sometimes when we talk about Pan-Africanism and about African unity, people think we are being too simplistic about it. No, it is not being simplistic and being naive. It is recognizing that as long as we remain the way we are, then Africa in the next 25 years will be recolonized. You know, what is the state of Africa as I speak now? What is the state of your continent as we speak now? Because of our disunity. Because when we are disunited, then it is good for Europe and America. And China progressively. Look at the state of your continent as I speak. Conflicts of one kind or another. I'll name the countries just for you to know how bad it is, because that is how it is. Go to northern Mozambique. The gas that is there cannot be produced because there is conflict. Northern Mozambique. Go to Somalia. Conflict. Here in your motherland, conflict. Go to South Sudan, conflict. Go to Sudan, conflict. Go to Libya, conflict. Go to Central African Republic, conflict. Go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, conflict. Go to Burkina Faso, conflict. Go to Mali, conflict. Go to Chad, conflict. Go to Niger, conflict. Go to Cameroon, conflict. Go to Nigeria, conflict. Do I go on? That is the state of the continent. So that even when we talk about intercontinental trade, you tell me, can you drive from Addis Ababa to Dakar in Senegal? Unless you are Daredevil himself. Which group will not kidnap or ambush you? That is the state of the continent because we are weak and disunited. I fly from Nairobi, Kenya for 1.5 hours. I come from the shilling zone. I go into the birr. 33 currencies in Africa. 33 currencies. None of which is used to conclude transactions anywhere. I come to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and I show my shilling. They say, what is this? But let me show the dollar. Oh, this is it. Let me show the euro. This is it. 80% of transactions in Africa are concluded outside of the continent in dollars. So you may have the Central Bank or the Federal Bank of Ethiopia, or Mickey Mouse. You may have the Central Bank of Kenya, Mickey Mouse. You may have all these 54 central banks useless. Because we are not playing in the real league, we are playing in the small league. That is why when the Chinese president summons all our presidents, and they summon them, the letters may be polite, but it's summons. They go to Beijing, tails between their legs, and they are told. Then the Chinese president gives Africa $60 billion. $60 billion. What is $60 billion? George Bezos has more than that given to a whole continent. That is the state of the continent. So as you have the honor and privilege of serving in the government of Ethiopia, and as you think about integration, that is the continent in which you are now, weak. 2 weeks ago, I watched in great pain on television in Bamako, Mali, young Malians celebrating in the streets that the government of Mali had entered into successful or possible successful negotiation with Wagner, which is a Russian mercenary group, to replace the French. And they are saying how beautiful it is now. And I said, a slave celebrating the departure of one slave master and the arrival of another slave master. That is the state in which we are. I watched a woman from Nigeria who had been rescued from the Mediterranean around Lampedusa saying, I will not go back to Africa. Even if I die in the Mediterranean, I'll try again and again. What is it that can make a human being say that I do not want to go back to my home? Because the natural instinct of a human being should be that you want to go home. is because we are weak. So we are invited to Beijing. Then we are invited to Tokyo, the Japanese African Conference. Then we are invited to Europe. Then we are invited to the United States. And lately, even the Arabs invite us because we are weak. That is Africa now. But let me conclude by looking at Africa in the future. What is the state of Pan-Africanism? Africa finds herself in a very difficult situation. What Nkrumah feared. Today, many African leaders have gotten used to the trappings of power. And those who speak about power, right? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I remember in 1997, I think, I may be wrong about the year, 1995, I think, I was serving as an intern at the Mwalimu Julius Nyerere Foundation in Dar es Salaam. And I had the privilege and honor of driving with Mwalimu Nyerere in Dar es Salaam. And he had only one guard and a driver. And he stopped at the few traffic lights and only moved when the traffic lights moved. And I asked him, Mwalimu, how did you leave power? He said, when I said I wanted to leave office, there was no shortage of people telling me, don't leave us as orphans. It is very rare to find those in positions of leadership in Africa today who would willingly leave office. Power in Africa is now sought by hook and crook and retained by hook and crook. Because the trappings of power are good. And permit me, when I am gone, even if I irritate you, in fact, perhaps my intention is to irritate you, so that you reflect upon what I'm going to say. And this is a personal thing. I'll give you an example. When I was appointed as the director of the Anti-Corruption Commission, I drove in the morning in my car with my driver. In the evening when I was leaving, there were 3 cars. Mine, what was allocated to me, and another one in front, and another one behind me, and 12 individuals. And I asked, who are these fellows? He said, these are your security. I said, I don't need my security. I don't need 2 cars, I only need 1 car. Because this thing you call security, this is spectacle. And throughout the period that I served, I had only 1 security and 1 car. And I say this because it is in the nature of power to make you use the things that you don't need. And once you get used to them, then without them, you feel empty and lonely. And you will find them. You'll be told, and many of you will love them. They are good. When doors are opened for you, they are good. When you occupy front seats, it is good. When you are addressed, Your Excellency, it is good. When you eat the best food, it is good. When you have security, it is good. But it can also dehumanize you. It can also monsterize you. I am asking you today that part of the problem of Africa is that we found human beings and we monsterized them. Writing in 1983, Nigeria's Chinua Achebe writes in a book which I commend to you, The Trouble with Nigeria, which could as well be the trouble with Africa. He says, the trouble with Nigeria is simply and squarely a problem of leadership. As we look at Africa today, I hope that this administration, which has now committed itself to the Pan-African movement, will think in that direction. And this brings me to what I think should be contemporary Pan-Africanism. If you look at the Treaty of the East African Community, the Treaty of the East African Community says that there shall first be a common market, then a common currency, and political federation, which ought to have happened in the year 2010. East Africa Community should have had its first president in 2010. That is now 21 years, 10 years later, there is no such thing. In ECOWAS, it ought to have been the same. In SADC, it ought to have been the same. I hope that with your population of 120 million, because Ethiopia is an economic powerhouse potentially. You know, Pan-Africanism, the new Pan-Africanism must have an economic component of it. That is how I understand Africa Agenda 2063. Africa Agenda 2063 says that by the year 2063, Africa will have pulled up her people into a middle-level economy on 7 pillars, economically, politically, and otherwise. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Area suggests to me that we'll have broken all the tariff and non-tariff barriers. Will we be able to achieve those in the spirit of new Pan-Africanism? Will we have one currency? Will we have one passport? We have already said so under the Kigali Agreement that we are going to have one passport. Will we have one telephone code? We have 55 telephone codes. You move from Nairobi 254, you come here, you have another one, you go to Eritrea, you have another one. There is no connectivity in the 21st century. How can you be taken seriously? Those of you in the United States of America, you fly from Boston, Massachusetts to San Francisco in the West, 6 hours, 40 minutes, the code is 1. The tariff is 1. The COVID test is 1. I moved from Nairobi to Addis Ababa, COVID test. If I don't travel this evening, I'll be subjected to another COVID test. I go to Tanzania, COVID test. Uganda, COVID test. Your nose will begin debating with you. In the United States of America, you take one COVID test from Miami and you don't take it as you go to St. Louis in Missouri. I'm talking about very practical things. I come here and I have to go through an immigration. My passport has to be stamped. Somebody in the United States of America does not have to do that. Somebody in the European Union across 27 countries does not have to do that. In China, which is, of course, 1.4 billion, does not have to do that. Until we change all those things, we are going nowhere. So that we have only one telephone code, so that we have only one currency, so that we have only a single immigration, so that we eliminate all these armies. You know, you look at some African countries and they have an army, which complete with 5-star generals, who have never even quelled a street riot, and they are generals. Your money goes into maintaining militaries, maintaining embassies that you don't need. You see why Africa is poor? All these 55 countries have embassies. If we were one, there would only be one ambassador for Africa in the United States of America. There would only be one army with regional policing. Am I being naive or simplistic? Yes, we can create a single Africa with a loose government, a confederal government, dealing only with foreign affairs and defense and monetary policy and general policy formulation, with different governance systems. That is the only way in which these narrow tribal instincts will be dampened. But as long as, and now I want to conclude, if we only see Pan-Africanism as sentimentalism, as a romantic idea about which we debate, and we remain as we are, then this is the Africa that I see. This is the Africa that I see in 25 years' time. Many Africans, either legally or otherwise, will break into different autonomous countries. Many of them. We'll have more than 100 countries in Africa, each claiming self-determination, and is already beginning to happen. Because we will be looking at narrow ethnic agenda as the only way of defining our affairs. Ethiopia will break down, Kenya will break down, Nigeria will break down, South Africa will break down. And look at South Africa. Only last week, the whites in Western Cape in South Africa have delivered a petition to the government in Pretoria saying they want to create their own country. The Democratic Republic of Congo will break down, Libya will break down. The only way in which we can immunize ourselves against all those things is to create a Pan-African nation which allows for self-determination within the nation. And we must redefine terms such as self-determination. Self-determination must mean the ability of a people within a bigger unit to enjoy their culture, to enjoy their tradition, to speak their language. They do it on a smaller scale in Switzerland, those of you who are familiar with Switzerland. And we de-emphasize the presidency, we de-emphasize the prime minister's office. Pixley Kaisa Kaseme said, and I conclude with him, Africa is diverse. Some people say that because of our diversity, she cannot unite. She can. Because unity in diversity is possible if we understand what human beings need. In the nature of things, human beings need security. In the nature of things, human beings need food. Human beings need medical services. They need infrastructure. If you have a government that allows that, he said, then it reminds me of the piano. If you press the black button of the piano, it produces some sound. If you press the white one, it produces some sound. But if you press both the black and the white, it produces melodious music. And I think that the new Pan-Africanism must look to that. And you who have the honor and privilege of thinking and working in government, it is your duty to start that journey. It is not going to be easy, but it is an intergenerational journey. Play your part, for it can be done, and it must be done.